Hey there. Welcome back to another episode of the Collecting Keys Real Estate Investing Podcast, the podcast where we teach you how to make massive income, not just passive income, because who doesn't like a lot of money all at once? Today's a Friday Focus episode, which means you have me as your host, Dan Austin, on a solo episode. Happy Friday. Happy Black Friday, I believe. This episode will launch the day after Thanksgiving. I hope your day's going well. My day literally started out like shit. Went upstairs, changed my son's diaper, didn't realize there was poop in it. Somehow it rolled out onto the floor, and then I walked all over his bedroom with poop on my foot, and I kept thinking that he smelled really bad. Walked all the way down the stairs, poop everywhere. So literally, it's been a shitty day so far, but it's going to get better from here. It can only go up, right? Anyhow, today I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the tactical nuances around seller finance deals, in particular the tax discussion. I want to do that because we talked a little bit about it on the episode that's going to drop next week, our Wednesday episode with me, Mike, and Dylan. And we've been getting some questions in the Scale Community Slack, which, if you're not familiar, the Scale Community is our coaching group. We have a Slack channel. We all chat about real estate stuff and help each other do better. If you want to know more about that, you can go to collectingkeys.com/scale. Anyways, there's a few things that people get wrong with seller finance, but the main one is around the benefits to the seller, and people just willy-nilly say, oh, it's going to reduce your tax as seller. You don't have this big capital gains tax. Well, yes and no to that. And the meat and potatoes of that is there's really two parts of the tax discussion, and you need to know these because you could potentially be putting the seller in a bad spot. And we kind of talk about some of the stories in the next Wednesday episode. And really what it comes down to is the first part that most people don't even know is what's called depreciation recapture. So depreciation recapture is when you've had a rental property. This doesn't play into if it's a primary residence, because you can't depreciate your primary residence. But if this is a rental property, maybe it's a tired landlord list, older individual, retired, and they just want to finally sell the last rental property or one of their rental properties, doesn't matter. When you have a rental property, if you take straight line depreciation, you take whatever asset value minus the land. So say you paid $150,000 for it, tax records say the land's worth $50,000, so the actual house is worth $100,000. You take that $100,000, you divide it by 27.5, which is 27.5 years, because that's what the government says your house should last. And then each year you depreciate a little bit. So say you're buying a house from a guy who owned it for 30 years, he owns it outright, and he depreciated that $100,000 value down to zero. Essentially, every year he took his little bit of depreciation to reduce his tax liability. And so according to the government, the house is worth zero. He depreciated $100,000. Maybe the house is worth, $200,000 now. So basically that $100,000 of depreciation he took over the last 27 and a half years, he has to pay 25% of that back. And he has to pay that back the year he sells it on his taxes. So essentially, he's going to have a $25,000 tax bill on that recapture. That's important to know because a lot of times when you're talking to sellers, I hear this all the time, they say, oh, well, you're going to reduce your income. You're only going to be getting a little bit of your principal back every single year. So that'll keep your taxable income lower, meaning you won't actually have to maybe bump up into the higher tax bracket. Yes. However, there's the caveat that they will have to pay their depreciation recapture all in year one. So that is a bummer. And you have to make sure that they know that so that you're not selling them a false bill of goods. But they're going to have to pay it regardless whenever they sell this property. So it just needs to fit them. The next piece to this is the capital gains. And this is where the benefit's overstated by a lot of folks trying to pitch seller financing. It's still a benefit. It still exists. And some of these tired landlords, these old dudes especially, they're just like, I don't want to pay any more taxes than I have to. And so the teeny little bit that might help them to not pay taxes, they're 100% all in on this. But if you think about it, so they have this same property, they bought it for $100,000. It's now worth $200,000. Their capital gains is between that $100,000 and the $200,000. So they have $100,000 capital gains. So if they were to sell the property, you paid cash for it. They just got a big $200,000 check. They would pay the $25,000 in depreciation recapture. And then they would have to pay the capital gains on that other $100,000 of value increase. Now, they can pay 0% capital gains, 15% capital gains, or 20% capital gains. And those are each individually based on their actual income for the year. And I don't know what those tax brackets are. I don't know what the income levels are for those. But you can think about most people in America are paying a 15% capital gains. So if they sold it year one, another $15,000 goes to capital gains. Now, if you spread that over a longer period of time, essentially what they can do is only pay a little bit of tax, right? So say you do a principal payment of like $500 each month, $6,000 a year. They're going to just pay the capital gains on that $6,000 for that year. And in the event that they have multiple properties they're selling, or maybe they have an income coming in, this could keep them below the 15% or below the 20%. So it could save them potentially 15 to 20% or 5% even between that 15 and 20% tax bracket. So that's where the capital gains savings comes in. The government gets their money no matter what, right? However, how much they get can be determined by how much income they get from the sale of this property in each year. So that's a huge advantage. Now, the third advantage, which you may run into, is for the retired folks that are on Medicare for their health care. Now, the challenge, I've ran into this with landlords. We bought two houses from a guy who was like 80-something years old, and he was hell-bent on not paying any more capital gains than he had to and not increasing his income. So we actually did an interest-only loan with him on these two properties, principal only, no interest, because he didn't want the income from that. But what he was really concerned about was his taxes going up, or his taxable income, his modified adjusted gross income or something like that, going up, because then he would have to pay more in Medicare premiums. And as you get older, one thing that's like guaranteed is your medical care is going to cost more and more money because you're going to need more and more medical care to stay alive. I Googled this, don't take this for fact, but it looks like if you are married, a income above $206,000, you have to pay higher premiums for Medicare Part B and Part D. I don't know what any of those like Part B and Part D means, but I do know basically you essentially have to start paying certain portions of that medical cost. And that can be significant, especially if you have medical issues. So for some sellers, this is a really big deal, right? So if they're going to have a huge gain, maybe that pushes them over that $206,000 or whatever, you may want to talk to them and say, hey, we could do seller financing to keep your adjusted income below that. And this also means that like a big high interest payment each year may not be good for them, especially if they're already drawing on Social Security and they've got a 401k they draw on and maybe a pension that they get. So they're like doing okay, but getting a bunch of interest payment, because interest payments are considered, income, might push them over that. And then they might have to start paying certain percentages higher on their Medicare. And that's a big deal, like I said, for some of these folks. That's a good advantage that applies to some people. Now, if you have a distressed landlord that has no money, realistically, they're probably not going to break into these thresholds anyways, and seller financing may or may not be good for them. If they want the recurring income, it could be fantastic and great for them. If they just need the money now, you may need a cash offer might be better. So just to kind of summarize the three pieces here, keep in mind, and when you're diving into these offers and you're trying to align the benefits to your seller, you've got depreciation recapture, and you're not going to know exactly what that is unless you talk to their accountant, or their accountant, you can look at their taxes. It's not a big deal. You don't need to know that, like detailed what their situation is, but you should definitely talk to them about that. If you can have that conversation or get that information from their accountant, great. But that depreciation recapture is important because they have to repay 25% of that, whatever they depreciate on that property. And then you have the capital gains piece, which we discussed, which is any gain above what they paid for the property or any gain above their actual asset value. Because if you put a new roof on it, that would actually increase the property value on the book value. So anything above whatever you've done to it and whatever you've capitalized, you're going to have to pay capital gains on it. So you could spread that out over a longer period of time, keep their income lower so that they're not in a higher capital gains tax bracket, moving from 0% to 15% or 15% to 20%. And then lastly, if they are retired, the Medicare piece can play a pivotal role in it, and it does come up more often than you think if your seller is over 65. So something to think about. Those are the three things. You're going to hear us talk a little bit about this in the Wednesday show next week, so I hope this kind of preps you for it and gets you kind of around the understanding of what we're talking about when it comes to taxes. The last thing I'll say just on the seller finance piece or any creative finances, and I'm always a big pro to this, it needs to make sense for your seller. Don't get them wrapped up and tied up into a long-term situation with you or whoever you assign this to if it doesn't make sense for them. Otherwise, you're just doing them an injustice, and it just makes everybody look bad in this industry. So do the right thing for your sellers and make sure what you're pitching aligns with them and isn't just in the best interest of you, because that's just shitty business and you're a shitty person if that's what you're doing. Anyways, hope you have a less shitty Friday than I did. And have a great weekend, and we'll catch you all next week. See ya.